Hey you, yes you, where are you watching from and what time is it right now? Drop it in the comments. I love seeing how far these stories travel. Now let's get into tonight's true crime case. So don't forget subscribe this channel and turn on notification. Story 1. I arrived in Moscow at the tail end of November, the city already wrapped in its wintry shroud. The days were short, and the sky never quite turned blue, only shifting from pale gray at noon to a murky, ink-like black by mid-afternoon. I had come as part of an exchange program from my university back home, ready to complete a semester of cultural and language immersion. My hosts were kind, the university efficient, and the campus, though stark and brutalist, carried the cold dignity of Eastern Europe's architectural past. I stayed in a dormitory just outside the garden ring. The building was old and utilitarian, a remnant from the Soviet era. It loomed like a concrete block over the snowy sidewalks, its hallways narrow and its staircases steep. The elevator, when it worked, groaned and shook as though resenting each floor it climbed. My room was on the 4th floor, at the end of the corridor. From my window, I could see the frozen Moskva River in the distance and the dull orange glow of the city's light pollution spreading out across the sky like a bruise. It was here, in this room, that I began to notice the absence. There had been another student in the room next to mine, a fellow international, an Indonesian girl named Aisya. We'd arrived on the same day and even taken the orientation tour together. She was quiet but friendly, always with a book or her headphones on. We shared occasional nods in the hall and stood next to each other in line at the cafeteria. But as December settled in, I realized I hadn't seen her in a while. It started subtly. Her door remained closed for days, the hallway light reflecting dully off its chipped paint. At first, I assumed she was sick or traveling for the holidays. But when I asked around, casually, hesitantly, no one seemed to remember her clearly. Some shrugged. Others looked confused. A few even claimed that no one had occupied the room next to mine since the previous spring. I knew that wasn't true. Her room was still there, her name still printed in fading ink on the mailbox in the lobby. But her presence, her laughter, her footsteps, the quiet hum of music through the wall, had vanished. I tried brushing it off. Maybe she had left quietly, returned home early. Still, something about the silence felt wrong. One night, unable to sleep, I walked the hallway past her door. It was slightly ajar. That stopped me cold. I hadn't heard it open. There had been no footsteps, no rustling, no click of the lock. And yet, the door was open, just enough to show darkness beyond the threshold. No light, no sound. I stood there for a long moment, my breath misting in the cold hallway air. Eventually, I forced myself back into my room and locked the door behind me. But sleep didn't come easily. From that point on, small things began to change. In the evenings, the corridor lights flickered more than usual. A damp, metallic scent crept into the stairwell, and though the radiators hissed and clanked, my room never seemed warm enough. My dreams turned strange. Faint whispering in languages I didn't speak, the feeling of being watched from just beyond the frame of a window, and sometimes a presence standing in the hallway, just outside my door. I started keeping notes. I told myself I was documenting these experiences for clarity, to convince myself they were real or not real. But each entry added weight to the feeling that something was unfolding, something hidden beneath the routine of university lectures and cafeteria meals. On December 12th, I returned from the metro station late after a study session at a friend's apartment. Snow drifted softly across the pavement, and the street lamps cast long, warped shadows. As I approached the dorm, I noticed a figure at the 4th floor window, her window, a silhouette, still, watching. When I entered the building, the security guard was dozing in his chair. I took the stairs, unable to shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. Each step echoed too loudly. The hallway was dark. The motion sensor lights flicked on, but only halfway down the corridor. The rest remained in shadow. Her door was wide open. Inside, it looked like she had never left. A winter coat still hung on a hook. Books stacked neatly on the desk. A notebook lay open on her bed, its pages filled with neat, looping script in Bahasa Indonesia. Her phone was plugged into a charger, screen dark. There was no dust, no signs of departure, only abandonment. I backed away and closed the door slowly, quietly. When I turned around, I saw that the elevator was open, its light casting a yellow glow down the hallway. But I hadn't pressed the button. I hadn't heard it arrive. Something had opened it. I stopped sleeping through the night. The air in the dorm had changed, becoming heavier, almost humid, despite the snow outside. I checked her room daily now. It remained untouched, suspended in time. I reported her absence to the university office, and after some awkward typing and a confused frown, the administrator told me no such student had been registered in our building. Her file was gone. I asked for the housing log. They denied my request. I searched the student database. Nothing. It was like she had been erased. But the room was still there. One evening, as I sat at my desk trying to write an email to my academic coordinator, the light above me flickered out. A low hum filled the room. Steady, like white noise, but deeper, like something electric and old. I stood, turned toward the hallway, and saw light bleeding from underneath her door. Pulsed, softly, rhythmically, a slow, steady glow. When I opened my door, the hallway was ice cold. My breath came out in thick clouds. I walked slowly toward her room, every step sounding wrong against the linoleum. The light from underneath the door grew brighter as I approached. When I reached it, the light vanished. Instant darkness. No sound. I didn't open the door. Instead, I descended the stairs and walked straight out into the snow. I wandered aimlessly through the streets of Moscow for what felt like hours, letting the cold numb my fear. I ended up at a cathedral, its golden domes reflecting the moonlight. I sat on a bench and waited for dawn. The university allowed me to transfer buildings 2 days later, after I feigned heating problems. They didn't ask questions. I didn't offer answers. My new dorm was newer, cleaner, warmer, but I never truly left that hallway behind. In early January, as I packed to return home, I decided to visit the university library one last time. I asked the librarian, an older man with an impeccable memory, about the student archives. He led me to a dusty back room filled with paper records, handed me gloves, and left me alone. I searched for hours. No sign of her name, no indication of a student from Indonesia arriving in the fall semester. But in one folder, tucked between pages from 5 years ago, I found a photocopy of an emergency report. The handwriting was rushed, the language formal. An international student, female, reported missing in December. Last seen in dormitory block 4. It wasn't her name on the report, but the details were chillingly similar. The room number was the same. I closed the folder and left without signing out. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, trying not to let my thoughts spiral. Before dawn, I rose, dressed, and walked to the old dorm one last time. Snow had buried the steps. The front entrance was locked, the windows dark. But in the upper floor, in the 4th room from the end, a faint light flickered once, then vanished. I turned away and never looked back. Now, back in my home country, with the safety of distance and spring on the horizon, I still think of that room, of her silence, of the strangeness in the walls of that building. I searched online, of course, found scattered rumors of disappearances, whispers of rooms that forget. No confirmations, just hints. Sometimes I wonder if she ever truly left, or if that dormitory remembers every soul that walks through its corridors, cataloging them not with names or records, but by memory, by silence. And sometimes, in the quietest part of night, I dream of that hallway again. The door is always open, and she is always standing there. Story 2. Airports always unsettled me. Something about the way time bends inside them, as if the world outside pauses while people inside rush in every direction. Leaving, arriving, vanishing. Frankfurt Airport, in particular, felt vast beyond reason. A concrete maze where everything smelled faintly of jet fuel and recycled air. I was there on an extended layover, 12 hours between connecting flights. My final destination was Stockholm, where a winter seminar awaited me. It was cold, even inside the terminal, with dry air and a lingering haze around the massive glass panes. I passed the time reading, walking in circles, and people watching, observing travelers as they filtered through the place like ghostly waves. Some dragged crying children, some looked lost, and others moved with robotic precision. It was around hour 6 that I noticed the suitcase. It was a hardshell model, navy blue, with minor scuff marks on the corners and a sagging baggage tag with faded print. It stood alone near gate B46, slightly crooked against a wall, almost as if someone had dropped it while turning and simply forgot to pick it back up. I didn't pay much attention at first. Unattended luggage wasn't uncommon, though it usually prompted immediate security intervention. Still, I passed it again an hour later, and it hadn't moved, nor had anyone approached it. No announcements were made. No uniformed staff hovered nearby. The crowd ebbed and flowed around it as though it wasn't there. I watched as children ran past, business people wheeled their own luggage beside it, and janitors cleaned the nearby floor without so much as glancing in its direction. It had become invisible. I sat nearby just out of curiosity at first, then gradually with unease. The suitcase emitted no odor, made no sound, but exuded a stillness that felt deliberate. I could not say why, but I became convinced it wasn't forgotten. It was abandoned. When I checked the overhead screens again, my gate had changed to B42, but I lingered. I started sketching the suitcase in my notebook to pass the time. I had always liked drawing when I traveled. Something about the shapes of strangers and the odd geometry of waiting areas soothed my nerves. When I finished the sketch and glanced back up, the suitcase had turned slightly. Just a few degrees, no more than a subtle rotation. But I knew it had moved. It now faced more squarely toward the corridor. I stared at it, convinced I must have imagined it, yet when I flipped back to my drawing, the orientation was clearly different. I stood up and took a cautious step closer. No one paid attention. People milled around with headphones on, checked phones, dozed off. The suitcase, I noticed, bore no airline stickers or destination labels beyond the faded tag. I couldn't read the tag. It had been water-stained and torn, the barcode half missing. I didn't touch it. Instead, I moved to a new seat across the terminal and tried to ignore it. Still, my eyes drifted back every few minutes. It hadn't moved again, but now it felt as though it was watching me. Not literally, of course, but something about it felt aware. I told myself I was overtired. Airports do that, distort your sense of time, space, and logic. Still, when I returned from the restroom 20 minutes later, the suitcase was gone. I froze. There had been no personnel, no warning, no alert. It had simply disappeared, or so I thought. When I reached my new gate, B42, I saw it again. The same navy blue suitcase, this time sitting innocently beside a row of chairs near the window. It faced the tarmac, wheels neatly aligned, the broken tag fluttering. My heart sank. Either someone had moved it quietly, or it had followed me. I tried not to look at it. I turned on my phone, opened a novel, stared at the same page for 20 minutes. I checked the gate clock, 2 hours left until boarding. Then the lights above flickered. Only once, but enough for several people to glance up. The intercom buzzed with static, though no message followed. The suitcase hadn't moved, but now a small puddle had formed beneath it. Clear, watery, with a faint yellow tint. It hadn't been there before. I stood, heart quickening, and looked around for staff. I spotted an airline employee wheeling a luggage cart across the hall and waved, but she didn't seem to notice. Others passed by, oblivious. The puddle continued to grow, slowly creeping toward the base of a bench. I took a photo with my phone, but the image came out strangely blurred, the suitcase distorted, as if the camera refused to focus on it. Feeling suddenly claustrophobic, I left the terminal area and wandered toward a quieter wing of the airport, an older part under renovation, where traffic was sparse and signage limited. There were rows of closed shops and covered kiosks, dimly lit corridors with flickering lights, and old flight posters curling at the edges. I sat alone, breathing slower, but within 15 minutes, I heard the familiar sound, plastic wheels dragging against tile. At first distant, then closer. The echo was unmistakable. I rose to my feet and turned the corner. There it was, sitting directly in front of me now, alone in the middle of a long, empty hall. The puddle had returned, wider this time, and now tinged with gray. I stepped back, unsure if I was awake. My hands trembled slightly, though the air was cold and still. I turned and walked quickly in the opposite direction, forcing myself to re-enter the main airport area. Crowds comforted me. Familiarity comforted me. But when I glanced at the reflective window near the escalator, I saw a shape behind me. Not a person, just the suitcase, caught in the warped reflection of the glass, several meters back, unmoving. But in the reflection, it looked open. When I turned around, it was closed. I didn't return to my gate immediately. I spent the remaining hour near a crowded food court, surrounded by noise and motion. I kept my backpack close, eyes scanning constantly. No suitcase, no puddle, nothing. Eventually, boarding began. I was one of the last to enter the aircraft, and as I found my seat and stowed my bag, I tried to convince myself that exhaustion had gotten the better of me. Airports warped the mind. Layovers stretched logic. I closed my eyes as the engines hummed to life and drifted into a shallow, uneasy sleep. When I woke, we were midair. I reached for my bag and pulled out my notebook. I flipped back to the drawing I had made of the suitcase and froze. It had changed. The drawing was darker now, the lines heavier, as though someone had traced over it. The suitcase was no longer closed. Its lid hung open slightly, and something thin and pale spilled from its edge, drawn in the faintest strokes, like fabric or skin. I hadn't drawn that. I stared at the page for a long time, until the captain announced our descent. After landing in Stockholm, I exited the plane as calmly as I could and hurried through the terminal. But the feeling hadn't left me. I felt watched not by people but by something that had seen me. When I arrived at my hotel, I opened my bag and found the notebook again. The drawing was gone. That page had been torn clean out. A day passed, then another. I read online that a section of Frankfurt Airport had been temporarily sealed off due to hazardous materials leakage. No further details were provided. The photo accompanying the article showed a familiar corner of the terminal, Gate B46. In the background, barely visible behind a row of seats, stood a navy blue suitcase, still, upright, waiting. Story 3. I had arrived in Recife just days before Christmas. The air was heavy with salt and heat, the kind that clung to skin even after sunset. My flight from Lisbon had been delayed for hours, and by the time I reached the hotel, the city was already glowing with festive lights. Strings of red, green, and gold blinked from balconies and street lamps, and the scent of grilled meat drifted in from the beachside stalls. I wasn't supposed to be there, not originally. The seminar I was meant to attend in Sao Paulo had been postponed, and rather than waste a ticket, I decided to take a detour through the northeast coast, a spontaneous gift to myself after a long and tiring year. On the morning of December 23rd, I heard about the parade. It was to be held that evening in the Central Plaza, something the locals celebrated with music, lanterns, and processions of costumed dancers. I was told the parade always drew enormous crowds, and that it was something not to miss. As the sun dropped low, I followed the flow of families, couples, and tourists toward the historic district. The buildings here were colonial, painted in soft pastels that glowed orange in the setting sun. The streets had been cordoned off with police tape, but it was cheerful, meant to guide rather than to restrict. Children perched on their parents' shoulders, and vendors moved through the crowd with baskets of popcorn and flashing LED toys. I stood near a row of old storefronts, not far from where the performers would pass. A brass band tuned their instruments at the far end of the avenue. The air was alive with the murmur of excitement and the rumble of distant drums. Somewhere behind me, a church bell chimed 8 times. The first floats rolled into view, draped in lights and carried by people dressed as reindeer and snowmen, waving joyfully at the crowd. I watched, smiling, swept into the rhythm and pageantry. Everything shimmered in the heat. It didn't matter that there was no snow. Christmas was alive here, real and bright and loud. And then the music stopped. It was sudden, not a fading out, but a jarring halt, as if someone had yanked the cord from the speaker system. I felt it before I understood it. A shift in the mood, a wrongness that spread like a ripple. The crowd, once a sea of motion and joy, slowed. Some looked toward the stage where the performers had frozen mid-dance. Others looked skyward, as though expecting weather to turn. I didn't see where the sound came from, only that it wasn't music. Something sharp cracked through the night air. A sound that didn't belong. Then came a second and a third. The crowd fractured like glass. Not in an explosion of panic, but in a quiet, confusing unraveling. People turned to one another in search of cues. Was it part of the performance? A firework? A car backfiring? But the dancers had vanished behind their floats, and the lights on the speakers had gone out. Then came motion, rushed, uneven. Someone ducked. Another stumbled forward into the barricade. A mother crouched low, wrapping her arms around two small children. I remained standing, frozen in place, feeling that cold surge of fear that climbs the spine and clouds the ears. There was another sound, closer, sharper. Something collided with metal, a tink-like noise, not far from where I stood. I instinctively stepped back, pushing myself into the shadowed alcove of a closed cafe. My breath came too quickly, and my heartbeat drowned out the ambient noise. By now, the crowd had begun to move in earnest. It was no longer a festival, now it was a surge. Not a scream, but something worse. A quiet, hurried rush, people trying not to draw attention, trying to disappear. The kind of retreat that told you they didn't fully understand the threat, only that it was real. From my shallow hiding place, I saw flashes of red and blue, police lights, further down the avenue. Someone shouted from a rooftop with a megaphone, though I couldn't make out the words. Then came more cracks, but fewer this time and more distant, as if whoever was behind them was either moving away or growing less certain. I crouched low and made my way along the edge of the building, careful not to stand fully upright. The festive lights were still on, still blinking on lampposts and tree branches, as though unaware that the spirit of the night had fled. A candy cane-shaped balloon drifted across the square like a ghost. Across the plaza, I spotted someone lying flat on the pavement, unmoving. A hat had fallen nearby, red with a white trim, like a Santa cap, but I couldn't tell if the person was injured, unconscious, or simply hiding. I wanted to reach them, but something instinctive held me back. Not fear for them, but fear of being seen by whomever had caused this. I still hadn't seen a figure, hadn't heard a voice. Just echoes, movements, and the metallic crack of something that shouldn't exist in such a place. I turned into a narrow alley between two buildings, away from the plaza and the remnants of the parade. The alley was littered with discarded cups and confetti. Music still played faintly from a speaker hung on a balcony above, though it now sounded eerie and slow, warped by distance and dissonance. Farther down, I found a stairwell that led below street level, into what looked like a delivery area or maintenance access point. I descended without thinking, just needing space between myself and whatever was unraveling above. The sounds of the city dimmed. The lights faded. I crouched near a wall behind a crate of soda bottles and wrapped my arms around my knees. I didn't know what time it was anymore. I didn't know how many people had been hurt, or if the threat had passed. I only knew something had broken in the air that night. Something sacred, something safe. The stale scent of damp concrete and old cardboard filled the stairwell, contrasting sharply with the festive scents outside. The distant hum of voices and sirens had faded to a low murmur, swallowed by thick walls and heavy metal doors. I pressed my back against the cold surface and closed my eyes, trying to steady my breath, to think clearly. Images from earlier that evening flickered through my mind. The smiles of children waving small flags, the bright costumes that had glittered under streetlights, the soft murmur of the crowd sharing stories and laughter. Felt like a lifetime ago. Time stretched, loose and undefined. Minutes blended together as I stayed motionless, trying to piece together what had happened. The fragments I had witnessed didn't add up neatly. There was no chaos of screams or frantic running, just a ripple of disturbance, a silence that screamed louder than noise. From somewhere deep in the city, a church bell tolled midnight. The sound was both reassuring and surreal, normalcy persisting despite the rupture in reality that I had witnessed. Suddenly, footsteps echoed from the stairwell above, sharp and quick. I pressed myself deeper into the shadows, heart thudding against ribs like a warning drum. The footsteps paused just outside the door to the basement. A key turned in the lock, then a door creaked open. Light spilled in, washing over me like cold water. For a moment, I thought I would be discovered, but then the footsteps moved on, ascending back upstairs. The door closed softly behind them. I exhaled slowly and sat up, running my fingers through my hair. The weight of what I'd seen was heavy on my chest, a pressure that refused to ease. I wanted to tell someone, to understand what I had narrowly escaped. But the fear still lingered, fear of the unknown, of the unseen, and of a night that had shattered a city's spirit. I found the stairwell leading back to the street and climbed slowly. Outside, the air was cooler, tinged with salt from the nearby ocean. The plaza was quiet now, emptied of the earlier crowd. Police and emergency vehicles remained, their flashing lights painting the old buildings with flickering red and blue. I stood at the edge of the square, watching the officers move with purposeful calm. They cordoned off areas and spoke quietly into radios. The festive decorations still blinked overhead, stubborn in their brightness, as if refusing to acknowledge the darkness that had fallen. For hours, I wandered the streets of Recife, unable to shake the feeling that the city had changed. Something fragile had broken beneath the surface of celebration and light, and I knew, with a certainty that chilled me, that Christmas 2024 would be remembered for reasons far beyond the usual joy and cheer. The next morning, the sun rose over Recife with a pale light, as if hesitant to illuminate a city still holding its breath. I walked along the coastline, the Atlantic stretching wide and indifferent before me. Waves crashed rhythmically against the shore, their timeless sound offering a strange comfort amid the recent turmoil. News outlets had already begun covering the events from the night before, though details were sparse and cautious. Authorities described it as an isolated incident, something sudden, inexplicable, and quickly contained. There was talk of shots fired, but no mention of casualties or motives. The official statements were guarded, careful not to inflame fears during the holiday season. But I knew better. The images I had carried home in my mind were clear. The sudden silence, the crack of danger in the air, the crowd dissolving into shadows, and the feeling, that lingering sense of something unseen, something that had broken the fabric of that night. As the city resumed its rhythms, vendors setting up their stalls, children laughing again in the streets, the scent of roasting chestnuts drifting from carts, I realized how fragile peace truly was, how quickly celebration could shift into silence, and how the light of joy might flicker against shadows deeper than we ever see. I stayed in Recife for a few more days, watching the city heal in small, quiet ways. People returned to their routines, the memories of the parade etched softly into their collective consciousness. For some, it was a night to forget. For others, a reminder of resilience and hope. And for me, a story I would carry always, of a Christmas night when the world seemed to pause, caught between light and shadow, and the hum of life quietly, relentlessly, went on. Story 4. The bitter cold had settled firmly over the small town of Umrå, its icy breath lingering in the air like a silent warning. December in northern Sweden brought with it long nights that seemed endless and days shrouded in gray twilight. The snow lay thick and undisturbed across the rooftops and streets, muffling the usual sounds of life into a quiet hush. It was in this frozen stillness that I found myself drawn into an unsettling mystery, one that began quietly, beneath the surface of a place meant to be safe. I worked at Soglantan, a modest care home nestled near the edge of town. The building was old but cared for, its warm interior a refuge from the biting cold outside. Inside, the air smelled faintly of pine cleaner and brewed coffee, a comforting aroma that lingered even in the quietest moments. The residents, elderly souls with gentle eyes and slow movements, formed a small community, each with their stories and histories quietly woven into the fabric of this place. My role was as a caregiver, someone who provided company, assistance, and the occasional comfort in twilight years. I had grown fond of the routines here. The morning light spilling through lace curtains, the soft shuffle of slippers in the hallway, and the murmur of familiar voices reciting memories from decades past. But that December, an undercurrent of unease rippled through Solglentan. It began with small, almost imperceptible changes, subtle lapses in memory becoming more frequent, brief moments of confusion that the staff initially attributed to winter lethargy or seasonal sadness. The weather often made the residents restless, the long darkness playing tricks on even the strongest minds. Then came the unexplained illnesses. It started with Ingrid, a quiet woman whose eyes always held a distant kindness. One evening, she seemed unusually pale, her breath shallow and uneven. I found her sitting in her chair, staring blankly at the window. Concerned, I alerted the nurse, but even medical tests offered no clear answers. Within days, a few others followed similar patterns: fatigue, dizziness, faint disorientation. The care home's medical staff was puzzled, chalking it up to a passing virus or the natural frailty of old age. Yet, there was something different this time. The pattern was too consistent, too sudden. Something about the timing and the symptoms gnawed at me. One chilly evening, after my shift ended, I lingered in the common room. The snow fell silently outside, and the amber glow of the lamps cast long shadows on the wooden floor. I thought about the residents, those quiet lives now shadowed by uncertainty. I felt an unfamiliar determination to understand what was truly happening within these walls. The care home had cameras in the hallways, a recent installation meant for safety and security. I requested access to the footage from the past few weeks, hoping to find some clue. A slip, a misstep, anything unusual. Reviewing hours of quiet corridors and peaceful rooms, I spotted subtle irregularities. A staff member pausing too long near the medication cart, a bottle slightly out of place, moments that might have otherwise gone unnoticed. The thought struck me with chilling clarity. What if the source of the sickness was not some external illness, but something inside Solglentan? Something hidden. As days passed, the unease deepened. I became more vigilant, carefully observing every interaction, every routine. The staff remained professional, but the atmosphere had shifted. Quiet glances exchanged in hallways, whispered concerns behind closed doors. No one spoke openly, yet the tension was palpable. One evening, as the twilight faded into night, I found myself near the medication room. The door was slightly ajar. Inside, rows of bottles and boxes were neatly arranged, but one bottle caught my eye, a vial with a faded label, tucked away behind others. Something about its placement seemed deliberate, almost secretive. I reached out, fingers trembling slightly, and held it up to the light. The liquid inside was clear, almost innocuous in appearance. But I knew appearances could be deceiving. That night, I resolved to uncover the truth. For the sake of those who trusted us with their care, and for the fragile community that depended on this home for safety. In the cold stillness of a Swedish winter, the quiet walls of Solglentan hid secrets darker than the long nights themselves. The following days passed in a haze of careful observation and quiet investigation. I maintained my routine outwardly, but inside I was gathering fragments, small, sometimes contradictory pieces that might form a larger picture. The residents' conditions waxed and waned. Some days brought faint improvement, only for new symptoms to surface in others. I kept returning to that bottle. Though I had not yet shown it to anyone, the very presence of an unlabeled vial within the medication room unsettled me. I began to cross-reference the contents of the medicine cart with the prescriptions on record, noting discrepancies and absences. The routine checks that usually reassured me now raised questions. One afternoon, I spoke privately with the nurse in charge, carefully describing the symptoms and my concerns without leaping to conclusions. She listened, her face etched with worry. She confirmed that similar suspicions had been raised, but nothing concrete had been found. The medical tests were thorough, and yet the cause remained elusive. I realized that the solution lay not just in medicine, but in the careful, methodical search for what had changed inside the care home. My mind circled back to the new staff member who had joined just weeks before, someone whose demeanor was polite but distant, who rarely engaged beyond what was necessary. On a cold morning, I observed the person closely during medication rounds. Their hands were steady, but I noticed a momentary pause before picking up certain bottles, a slight hesitation that suggested something beneath the surface. I discreetly followed afterward, noting where they went and what they touched. It was during one such moment that I saw them slip a small object into their coat pocket. The object glinted faintly in the pale light, a small plastic container, suspiciously similar to those used for pills or chemicals. My heart quickened. I knew I was close to understanding something important. I resolved to confront the matter with the seriousness it deserved. Later that day, I accessed the records again and cross-checked the inventory of all substances stored on site. A pattern emerged. Small quantities of a certain substance had gone missing, unaccounted for in any official documentation. I reported these findings discreetly to the management, urging a thorough review and immediate action. The administration responded with urgency, involving local health authorities to conduct a full investigation. The days that followed were tense but hopeful. The residents were closely monitored, and their treatments adjusted under careful supervision. The staff worked with renewed focus, determined to restore the safe, nurturing environment that Soglintan was meant to be. Ultimately, the investigation confirmed that a small amount of a toxic substance had been introduced into the medication supplies, enough to cause the symptoms but not to cause lasting harm, thankfully. The source was identified, and the individual responsible was removed from their duties pending further review. The residents slowly regained their strength, the shadows lifting from their eyes as health returned. The care home, scarred but resilient, began to breathe again with warmth and quiet life. Standing once more in the familiar halls, I felt a profound gratitude for the vigilance that uncovered the truth, for the compassion that healed, and for the fragile trust that had been preserved. The cold December nights outside remained long and dark, but inside Soglintan, light and hope endured. Story 5. December in Singapore always carried a unique kind of bustle. Despite the tropical heat and humidity, the city's shopping districts glowed with festive lights and decorations, drawing crowds from every corner of the island and beyond. The air buzzed with the mingling sense of holiday treats and the murmur of families weaving through stores, their faces bright with anticipation. I found myself at Marina Bay Sands that afternoon, one of the busiest malls in the city. The place was a maze of polished floors, towering glass walls, and endless rows of shops, cafes, and restaurants. Shoppers hurried from one point to another, some stopping to admire the elaborate Christmas displays or to capture photos of the giant trees and twinkling lights. I had come to meet a friend, but before our appointment, I decided to take a stroll through the mall. The vibrancy was infectious. Children pulled at their parents' hands, couples carried shopping bags filled with gifts, and tourists paused to marvel at the architecture. It was a place alive with life and laughter, or so it seemed. Then, amidst the throng, I noticed the sudden shift in atmosphere. A subtle tension rippled through the crowd, unnoticed at first but growing with every passing minute. My attention was drawn to a commotion near a popular baby products store. Security personnel and mall staff were quickly gathering, and I could see a cluster of people whispering urgently, their expressions grave. Curiosity and concern pushed me closer. I overheard fragments: missing baby, abducted, call the police. The words hung heavy in the air, stark against the backdrop of festive cheer. I stayed at the edge of the scene, watching as officers arrived, their faces serious but controlled. The mother of the missing child sat on a bench nearby, surrounded by family and friends, her face a mask of shock and disbelief. No one spoke aloud, but the pain in the room was palpable. As the hours passed, I found myself drawn deeper into the unfolding events. The mall was cordoned off in places. Security cameras were reviewed, and announcements made discreetly to staff. The search began in earnest, officers scanning entrances and exits, security guards combing through parking lots and nearby streets. I offered to help where I could, coordinating with volunteers who had arrived, sharing information, and keeping spirits up despite the growing worry. The sense of community was strong. Strangers became allies, united by the urgent hope of finding the missing child safe. Late into the evening, a breakthrough came. A security guard reported a suspicious person leaving the mall in haste, a figure captured by surveillance cameras clutching a small bundle. Officers moved quickly, tracing the path and alerting nearby patrols. I remember the tension as moments stretched. Time seemed to suspend between hope and fear. Then, the news. The baby was found, unharmed, in a nearby neighborhood. The person responsible was apprehended without incident. Relief swept through the mall and the city like a wave. In the days that followed, the story unfolded in news reports and conversations. The community's response was hailed as a model of vigilance and cooperation. The mother's gratitude was immense, though tempered by the ordeal. For me, it was a stark reminder of how fragile safety can be, even in places that seem secure and familiar, but also how strength and kindness can arise in the face of uncertainty. That December, beneath Singapore's gleaming skyline and festive lights, the city showed its heart, watchful, resilient, and compassionate. The days after the incident were a blur of news coverage and community support. The mall, usually a place of light-hearted shopping and leisure, carried a new solemnity. Visitors spoke in hushed tones, the echo of what had happened lingering in the spaces where laughter once filled the air. For me, the experience sparked a new perspective on the world around us. I found myself reflecting deeply on the delicate balance between everyday normalcy and the unexpected fractures that can appear at any moment. The mall was a microcosm of society, a place where lives intersected in fleeting, sometimes unnoticed ways, until something extraordinary shattered the illusion of safety. I spent time volunteering with local neighborhood watch groups and community safety initiatives, eager to contribute to the protection of families and children. The incident had awakened a responsibility in me, a desire to be vigilant without succumbing to fear. Back at the mall, the management introduced enhanced safety measures. Security cameras were increased in number and improved in technology, and staff underwent rigorous training to identify and respond to suspicious behavior swiftly and efficiently. These changes, though practical, carried a deeper significance, a promise that such an event would not be allowed to pass unnoticed or unanswered again. The mother of the abducted baby, whose quiet strength had been evident throughout, became a quiet advocate for child safety awareness. Her story, though painful, became a beacon for families across Singapore, reminding them of the importance of vigilance and community care. Through it all, the city seemed to hold its breath and then slowly exhale, a collective resilience emerging stronger than before. Life returned to its usual rhythm, but with an added layer of awareness beneath the surface. For me, every trip to the mall afterward was marked by a subtle caution, a quiet acknowledgement of what had transpired. Yet, amid this caution, I also saw the unyielding spirit of a community determined to protect its own, to stand together in the face of adversity. The incident became more than just a headline or a news story. It became a testament to the power of watchfulness, kindness, and the bonds that hold us all together. In the heart of Singapore, beneath the gleaming lights and the vibrant hum of life, I found a renewed faith in humanity's ability to care, to respond, and to heal. Story 6. December in London was always a spectacle of lights, traditions, and an outpouring of goodwill. The city streets sparkled with festive decorations, shop windows dressed in elaborate displays, and the buzz of holiday shoppers filled the air with excitement. Charitable causes flourished at this time of year, donations pouring in, volunteers rallying, and hearts opening wide. I had always admired this season for the spirit it inspired. Working in the nonprofit sector, I had firsthand experience witnessing how kindness and generosity could transform lives, even if only in small ways. That year, I had taken a temporary position assisting with various holiday charity campaigns across the city, eager to contribute and be part of something meaningful. It started with a flyer, a glossy, colorful leaflet promoting a new charity initiative promising to deliver gifts and essentials to disadvantaged families across the UK. The campaign was called Heart of Christmas. Its marketing was impeccable. Professional logos, endorsements from well-known public figures, and emotionally compelling stories designed to inspire donations. I was assigned to help coordinate logistics for a local collection point in East London. Volunteers were enthusiastic, and the turnout seemed promising. Donations came in steadily: warm clothes, toys, food parcels. There was an air of hope and community spirit. But as December wore on, subtle inconsistencies began to surface. Reports of delays in distribution trickled in. Families supposedly receiving aid mentioned not getting any contact or support. At the warehouse, pallets of unopened donations sat untouched, and some of the volunteers whispered concerns about a lack of clear direction from the central organizers. Driven by curiosity and concern, I began quietly investigating. I combed through paperwork, scrutinized bank records, and cross-checked delivery schedules. It wasn't long before troubling patterns emerged. Funds raised under the Heart of Christmas banner were far less accounted for than the volume of donations suggested. Many parcels never reached their intended recipients. I decided to dig deeper. I contacted other volunteers, community leaders, and local charity workers, piecing together testimonies and shared observations. A narrative unfolded, one of a sophisticated scam, designed to exploit the generosity of the public during the most charitable season of the year. The scale was staggering. Thousands of pounds had been raised, but the aid had been diverted or hoarded, leaving countless vulnerable families without the help they desperately needed. The organizers behind the campaign were elusive, their identities obscured behind layers of corporate structures and anonymous accounts. Determined to expose the truth, I collaborated with investigative journalists and local authorities. The process was slow and meticulous, requiring patience and care to ensure accuracy and protect those involved. Public outrage grew as the story broke. The media coverage was relentless, and the scandal became one of the biggest charity frauds in recent UK history. The Heart of Christmas campaign was dismantled, its leaders facing legal scrutiny and prosecution. Yet amid the shock and disappointment, the community's spirit endured. Genuine charities and grassroots organizations redoubled their efforts, stepping in to fill the gaps left by the scam. Volunteers, donors, and activists worked tirelessly to restore trust and ensure that the true meaning of the season, compassion and generosity, was not lost. For me, the experience was both a harsh lesson and a testament to resilience. It underscored the importance of vigilance, transparency, and accountability in charitable work, especially during times when emotions run high and goodwill is abundant. That December, beneath London's festive glow and amidst the turmoil, I witnessed the complex interplay of human kindness and deception, and ultimately, the unwavering hope that kindness can prevail. As the scandal unfolded, I found myself increasingly drawn into the investigation. The emotional weight of the situation was heavy, knowing that many people had opened their hearts and wallets in good faith, only to have their generosity betrayed, was difficult to bear. Yet I was determined to see the truth revealed. The first step was to understand how the scam had been so meticulously engineered. The Heart of Christmas campaign had been launched with a veneer of legitimacy so convincing that even seasoned charity workers had been fooled. The organizers had crafted a narrative that pulled at every string of empathy. Families struggling to feed their children, elderly citizens living in isolation, communities shattered by hardship. Donation drives were held in bustling city centers, with volunteers in branded jackets distributing flyers and speaking earnestly to passers-by. Online portals accepted contributions with ease, and social media amplified the campaign's reach. It was a masterclass in marketing. Every image, every message designed to inspire trust and goodwill. But behind the scenes, cracks began to show. My examination of the financial records revealed that while donations flooded in, only a fraction made it to actual charitable causes. The rest had been funneled into shell companies and offshore accounts. The warehouse where donations were supposed to be sorted was often empty, or worse, filled with expired or unusable goods. I was fortunate to connect with a few insiders, volunteers who had grown suspicious and quietly gathered evidence. Their bravery was remarkable, risking backlash to ensure the truth emerged. Their testimonies painted a picture of manipulation and deceit, orchestrated by a small group that exploited the season's goodwill for personal gain. The authorities launched a formal inquiry. Police officers and financial investigators worked tirelessly, tracking the flow of funds and interviewing those involved. Court cases were set in motion, and the perpetrators faced charges ranging from fraud to money laundering. Throughout this turmoil, the media's spotlight was intense. News outlets covered the story extensively, interviewing victims, volunteers, and experts. Public discussions arose about the importance of verifying charities and the risks inherent in donating, especially during peak seasons when scams tend to increase. Yet, amid the darkness, stories of hope and resilience surfaced. Established charities reported a surge in donations as people redirected their support toward trusted organizations. Community groups mobilized, organizing their own drives to ensure no family was left behind that Christmas. I witnessed volunteers working late into the night, sorting donations and preparing parcels with renewed dedication. Local businesses contributed goods and services, and neighbors came together to deliver aid directly to those in need. The city's true spirit was alive, not in the slick campaigns of the scammers, but in the grassroots efforts of ordinary people acting out of genuine compassion. Personally, the experience transformed my understanding of charity and trust. I learned the importance of asking questions, verifying sources, and supporting transparency. More than that, I realized how fragile trust can be and how vital it is to protect it, especially when it underpins the goodwill that fuels acts of kindness. As December drew to a close, the city slowly regained its festive cheer. The scam was a harsh reminder, but it did not extinguish the light of generosity. Instead, it strengthened resolve, an affirmation that in the face of deception, community and integrity endure. That Christmas in the United Kingdom, beneath the glow of festive lights and the hum of holiday celebrations, I saw how truth, courage, and kindness can prevail, reminding us all of the real heart of the season. Story 7. The neon lights of Tokyo never seemed to sleep, casting an ever-shifting glow across the city's intricate web of streets and alleys. December in this sprawling metropolis brought a chill that seeped through layers of clothing but could not dim the electric energy pulsating through its heart. It was a city of contrasts. Ancient temples resting quietly beside towering skyscrapers, quiet moments hidden among the crowds. I had arrived in Tokyo a few days earlier, drawn by the promise of adventure and the unique allure of this city. As a freelance journalist with a penchant for digital culture, my interests often led me to explore the lives of those who shaped the virtual world, streamers, bloggers, and YouTubers whose voices reached millions, but whose realities often remained private. One such figure had recently come to my attention, a young YouTuber named Haruto Kaito, known for his vibrant personality and creative content. Haruto had amassed a large following with videos showcasing Tokyo's hidden corners, local cuisine, and cultural festivals. His channel was a colorful tapestry of life in the city, joyful, spontaneous, and deeply personal. The news of his sudden death had sent ripples through the online community. Found lifeless in a capsule hotel in Shinjuku, the circumstances were unclear, and speculation ran rampant. I felt compelled to understand more, to piece together the story behind the headlines and the digital facade. My investigation began with visits to the places Haruto had filmed, meeting those who had known him, and studying his online presence. His videos portrayed a man full of life, but subtle hints suggested a complexity beneath the surface, moments of quiet reflection, occasional pauses that hinted at struggles unseen by his audience. The capsule hotel itself was a unique space, compact, efficient, a symbol of Tokyo's ingenuity in maximizing limited space. Haruto's capsule was located on the 5th floor, a small pod with barely enough room for a bed and some personal items. It was here, alone in this tiny chamber, that his life had quietly ended. The hotel staff described him as polite and unassuming, often keeping to himself but courteous to those he encountered. There was no indication of distress or conflict, and the hotel's security footage showed no unusual visitors or disturbances. As I delved deeper, I uncovered the pressures Haruto faced as a content creator. The demand for constant engagement, the relentless cycle of videos and social media updates, and the weight of expectation from millions of followers were immense. Behind the cheerful thumbnails and upbeat commentary lay a reality marked by fatigue and isolation. I reflected on the paradox of digital fame, how millions could feel connected to a person through screens and comments, yet the individual behind the lens could feel profoundly alone. The capsule hotel, with its enclosed pods and shared spaces, seemed a fitting metaphor for this paradox. Physical proximity without true connection. While the official investigation concluded that Haruto's death was from natural causes, the broader narrative was more complex. It was a reminder of the human behind the persona, the fragility hidden beneath the curated image. In the days that followed, I documented my findings, not just to report the facts, but to honor the memory of a young man whose life, though brief, had touched many. The story became a meditation on the modern condition, the interplay between visibility and solitude, between connection and loneliness. Tokyo continued to pulse with life, its streets alive with the hum of possibility. And somewhere within its endless lights and shadows, the memory of Haruto Kaido lingered, a quiet reminder of the stories waiting to be told beneath the surface of the digital age. Days passed as I wandered through Tokyo's labyrinthine streets, tracing the footsteps of Haruto Kaido. I visited the small ramen shop he had praised in one of his videos, where the owner recalled a young man always eager to try new dishes, often scribbling notes in a small notebook. At the bustling Shibuya crossing, I imagined Haruto filming the swarm of people, capturing the chaotic beauty that defined the city. His online diary, the videos and posts he left behind, became a mosaic of joy, ambition, and subtle melancholy. One clip showed him standing by the Sumida River as cherry blossoms drifted in the breeze, a soft smile touching his lips but his eyes distant. Another featured a late-night stroll through the quiet alleys of Asakusa, the lanterns casting long shadows that seemed to mirror his own. It was clear he loved Tokyo deeply, yet there was an undercurrent of loneliness woven throughout his digital footprint. Followers had often sent messages urging him to take care of himself, to rest, but the relentless pace of his work seemed unyielding. I learned that many content creators like Haruto felt trapped by their own success, pressured to maintain visibility and relevance. The algorithm of the platforms they used rewarded constant output, leaving little room for pause or healing. Behind the scenes, the joy of sharing life's moments was often overshadowed by exhaustion and isolation. Visiting the capsule hotel again, I met some of the staff who had grown fond of Haruto. They shared memories of quiet conversations in the lobby, where he spoke hesitantly about his dreams of expanding his channel, perhaps one day creating documentaries beyond the fleeting trends of social media. His capsule was modest, decorated with a few personal mementos, a small camera, and notebooks filled with ideas. It was a space that reflected both his creativity and the solitude he experienced. The tiny pod felt both protective and confining, much like the life he led. As the investigation continued, officials confirmed no foul play. Medical reports pointed toward natural causes related to underlying health conditions exacerbated by stress and fatigue. There was no indication of intentional harm, and those who knew him hoped that his story would prompt greater awareness of the pressures faced by digital creators. The online community mourned deeply. Tributes poured in from fans worldwide, lighting virtual candles and sharing memories. The hashtag Remember Haruto trended for days, a collective outpouring of grief and appreciation. I reflected on the fragile balance between public life and private struggle. Haruto's story was not unique, but it was a stark reminder of the humanity behind every screen name and profile picture. It compelled me to question how we, as a society, engage with digital fame and the cost it extracts. In the quiet moments after the storm of media attention, I sat by the Tokyo Tower, watching the city sparkle beneath the winter sky. The world moved on, but Haruto's legacy endured in the stories he told, the smiles he inspired, and the silent lessons he left behind. His life, though cut short, was a beacon, a reminder to look beyond the surface, to recognize the unseen battles fought behind every digital window, and to value the human connection that no screen can replace. The days that followed Haruto's passing were filled with a mixture of reflection and subtle unease. While the official reports had ruled out anything suspicious, the absence of clear answers left many questions lingering in the air. I found myself thinking about the many faces behind the screens. People like Haruto, whose lives were public yet profoundly private. In the quiet corners of Tokyo's capsule hotels, cafes, and parks, I sensed a silent narrative unfolding. The city itself seemed to hold its breath, a vast network of connections both visible and invisible. In this digital age, the boundaries between reality and performance blurred, leaving creators to navigate not only their art but their own mental and emotional well-being. I spent time at a small community center near Haruto's favorite district, where I met other young creators, filmmakers, photographers, and bloggers, who shared their stories of pressure and perseverance. They spoke of the demands to constantly produce content, to maintain an image, and the toll it took behind closed doors. Haruto's story had struck a chord with them all, a reminder of the importance of support and understanding. As I pieced together more of Haruto's life, I discovered his commitment to honesty and connection. Despite the curated nature of social media, he had always sought to share authentic moments. His laughter, his struggles, and his dreams. His final videos, though joyful on the surface, contained subtle signs of fatigue that now felt poignant in hindsight. The community's response was heartening. Fans and fellow creators organized meetups and discussions focused on mental health awareness, digital well-being, and the need for balance. Platforms began revisiting their policies, exploring ways to reduce harmful pressures on content creators. For me, documenting Haruto's story became more than an assignment. It was a journey of empathy and insight into the fragile threads that weave together modern lives. It was a reminder that behind every screen was a person deserving of care, respect, and kindness. One chilly evening, I returned to the capsule hotel. Standing outside, I looked up at the glowing skyline, feeling a mixture of sadness and hope. The city was alive with stories, some told, many untold, and among them was the story of Haruto Kaito. A story that echoed beyond the pixels and views, touching the hearts of those who paused to listen. In the end, Haruto's legacy was not just the videos he made, but the conversations he inspired and the awareness he brought to a world that often overlooks the quiet struggles beneath the surface. Tokyo continued to shine, a city of light and shadow, carrying his memory forward as it always had, with resilience and grace. In the weeks that followed, I compiled my notes and reflections into a piece that aimed to honor Haruto not just as a public figure but as a human being. I avoided sensationalism, instead focusing on the truths that his life and death revealed about the fragile intersection of identity, creativity, and the digital world. The process was humbling. To tell a story with respect and care, especially one involving loss, demanded a delicate balance. I wanted readers to see beyond the headlines and the viral moments to the person who laughed, dreamed, and struggled in a small capsule room in Tokyo. Haruto's family, distant but deeply touched by the outpouring of support, sent messages of gratitude. They hoped his story would help others understand the challenges faced by those caught in the spotlight of online fame. The capsule hotel where he stayed quietly honored his memory, dedicating a small plaque near the lobby, a reminder of the lives woven into the fabric of the city, often unseen and unheard. As Tokyo moved into the new year, life resumed its relentless pace. Yet, amid the bustle, I noticed a subtle shift. Conversations around mental health in creative industries gained momentum, new resources became available, and a growing awareness took root. For me, the experience left an indelible mark. I had come to Tokyo seeking a story, but what I found was a lesson in empathy and the complexity of human experience. Haruto's journey, though marked by tragedy, became a beacon, urging us all to look closer, listen deeper, and care more. The city's neon lights continued to flicker in the cold December nights, casting long shadows and bright hope. Somewhere within those lights, Haruto's story remained, a testament to the quiet resilience of those who share their lives with the world, reminding us that behind every screen is a heart beating with hopes and fears, joys and sorrows, very much like our own. Story 8. December 2024. The cold air in the French countryside had a biting quality that day, one of those late autumn days when the sun struggled to warm the earth, and the clouds hung low like a gray curtain. I was driving back from Lyon toward Paris along the autoroute A6, a route I had taken many times before. The road stretched ahead, bordered by skeletal trees and fields fading into winter's rest. My mind was preoccupied with work and the rhythm of everyday life, but that calm was shattered when I noticed the flashing lights in the distance. A collision had occurred. Police cars and emergency vehicles lined the roadside, their sirens quiet but their presence commanding. I pulled over carefully, curiosity mingling with concern. A fatal crash, the officer said, involving a black sedan and a commercial truck. Initial reports suggested a tragic accident, one of those sudden moments when everything changes. But as I stood there, watching the scene unfold, something felt off. The sedan's position was unusual, almost staged. There was a strange stillness, an absence of the frantic energy typical of crash scenes. The driver's side window was shattered, yet no broken glass was scattered on the road. The skid marks appeared inconsistent with the impact location. A series of small details caught my attention, each raising questions. I am a journalist, and while my beat is often the mundane, moments like this pull me deeper into the shadows where truth and speculation meet. Was this truly an accident, or something darker? Murder disguised by chaos? As the investigation progressed, I began to trace the lives connected to the victims. The driver of the sedan was a man named Julien Mercier, a mid-level executive in a Parisian tech firm. His reputation was solid, his life seemingly unremarkable. But digging into his background, I found whispers of disputes at work, a recent restructuring that left many anxious, and hints of threats made behind closed doors. The truck driver, a seasoned professional named Alain Dubois, was known for his steady hand and long tenure on the road. His calm demeanor was the subject of respect among colleagues. Yet even he had secrets, family troubles, and unexplained absences in the weeks before the crash. I traveled to the small town near the crash site, meeting with locals who had witnessed the moments before and after the collision. Their stories varied, some describing seeing the sedan veer abruptly, others recalling a shadowy figure near the truck in the pre-dawn hours. The police maintained their stance, accident. But my instincts urged caution. Something beneath the surface demanded closer scrutiny. At the local cafe, I studied the news reports and official statements. The tone was measured, factual, but behind the headlines lay a tangle of uncertainty. The lines between accident and intent blurred, leaving a haunting question mark over that cold December morning. I returned to the highway, walking the stretch where the vehicles had come to rest. The road was quiet now, the aftermath absorbed by the indifferent landscape. Yet in the silence, the echoes of that day lingered. A fatal crash or a calculated murder? My investigation was just beginning. In the following days, the quiet French countryside seemed to hold its breath. The stretch of highway where the crash occurred became a place of whispered conversations and cautious glances. I returned often, retracing the paths of Julien Mercier and Alain Dubois, hoping to piece together the puzzle. Julien's life revealed a man under pressure. The tech company where he worked was on the brink of a major product launch, fraught with internal conflicts and rivalries. Colleagues spoke of intense meetings and veiled threats, though nothing overtly malicious. Julien himself had kept a low profile, but behind his calm exterior was a man grappling with uncertainty. Alain, the truck driver, had a simpler but no less complicated story. Years on the road had made him cautious and solitary. His recent absences, explained by family emergencies, hinted at private struggles. A neighbor confided that Alain had been particularly anxious in the weeks before the crash, but no one knew why. As I delved deeper, I uncovered a tangled web of business secrets and personal troubles. Julien's project involved a revolutionary technology, one that could disrupt the industry. I found documents suggesting whistleblower threats and potential sabotage. The possibility of foul play grew stronger, yet the physical evidence remained perplexing. The crash scene contained inconsistencies that suggested more than an accident, but without direct proof, the authorities remained hesitant. Forensics revealed that the truck's brakes had been tampered with, a fact that pointed to deliberate intent. I interviewed experts quietly, discussing scenarios and motives. The idea of murder disguised as accident was plausible, but the question remained, who would benefit most? The answers seemed buried in layers of corporate intrigue and personal vendettas. The turning point came when an anonymous tip led me to a hidden cache of emails between Julian and a former business partner. The messages hinted at betrayal, threats, and a secret meeting scheduled the night before the crash. The location matched a nearby rest stop where witnesses recalled seeing two men arguing heatedly. Piecing these clues together, I formed a narrative that suggested Julian's death was no accident. A confrontation had escalated, leading to a planned act of violence masked by the staged crash. The true story was a blend of ambition, fear, and desperation. I presented my findings to the local authorities, urging a renewed investigation. The police reopened the case, expanding their inquiries and following the new leads. The public response was one of shock and reflection. How easily tragedy can hide behind the facade of accident. In the end, justice took its measured course. The investigation uncovered a plot involving corporate espionage and personal revenge. The perpetrators were brought to trial, and the truth, though painful, was laid bare. For me, the experience was a stark reminder of the complexities beneath everyday life. The highway that once seemed a simple route between cities became a symbol, a place where fate and human choices collided. As winter gave way to the soft light of spring, I returned one last time to the roadside. The signs of the crash had faded, replaced by the quiet growth of grass and wildflowers. Yet in the calm, the memory remained vivid, a story of loss, truth, and the enduring quest for understanding. Driving away, I carried with me the weight of that December day, the faces of those caught in its wake, and the knowledge that sometimes the road to truth is as winding and uncertain as the highway itself. Story 9. December in northern Canada is a season ruled by relentless cold and often unforgiving weather. That year, 2024, the winter arrived early and with an unusual ferocity. The small town of Maple Ridge, nestled near the edge of dense forests and frozen lakes, found itself bracing for one of the worst snowstorms in recent memory. I had lived in Maple Ridge for several years by then, drawn by its quiet beauty and the promise of solitude. The town was modest, just a handful of streets, a community center, a library that doubled as a warm refuge during harsh days, and homes built to withstand the bitter cold. But no one was ever truly prepared when the wind howled and the snow fell in thick, suffocating blankets. The evacuation order came late on a December evening. A sudden shift in the storm's path meant that power lines could be downed, roads rendered impassable, and the risk of isolation dangerously high. The town council urged residents to move to the community center or seek shelter in neighboring towns before the storm's full force arrived. I packed what I could, documents, some clothes, a few essentials, and joined the stream of people heading toward the community center. The snow fell heavily by then, soft at first but soon thickening into a dense curtain of white. Visibility dropped quickly, the familiar streets turning into ghostly corridors of ice and shadow. As we moved, a sense of urgency mixed with unease gripped me. The evacuation was orderly but tense, each step measured against the cold biting through layers of clothing. In the swirling snow, the forest loomed, dark and silent, its trees heavy with frost and ice. Near the edge of town, as we passed the old mill now long abandoned, I noticed something unusual, an object partially buried in the snow. Curiosity compelled me to approach, the wind biting at my cheeks. Clearing away the frost, I saw it was a body, a man lying still, face pale and motionless beneath the snow's soft shroud. Emergency responders were quickly alerted, and the evacuation halted momentarily. The authorities arrived with solemn professionalism, cordoning off the area, their faces grave under their winter gear. The storm continued to rage around us, snowflakes swirling as if mourning the quiet presence in the cold. The man was later identified as Thomas Carter, a local who had gone missing several days before the storm's arrival. His disappearance had been a quiet concern among townsfolk, a mystery quietly whispered but never resolved. Now, with the storm's arrival, the truth had been revealed in the most somber way. I stayed nearby, watching as the search teams worked through the night. The snowstorm created an eerie stillness, broken only by the crunch of boots on frozen ground and the muffled voices of rescuers. The community center, once a place of refuge and warmth, became a backdrop to the unfolding tragedy. As dawn broke, the storm began to subside. The town was coated in thick white, every surface transformed, every sound softened. The evacuation resumed, but the mood had changed. The discovery of Thomas's body had cast a shadow over the town, a reminder of the fragile boundary between survival and loss. Over the following days, I learned more about Thomas's story. He had been a quiet man, well-liked but reserved, someone who found solace in the forests surrounding Maple Ridge. Some speculated he had ventured out during the early storm to check on a property or a trapped animal, never returning home. The investigation concluded that his death was accidental, a victim of the storm's overwhelming force and the unforgiving wilderness. No foul play was suspected, only the tragic reality of nature's power. In the weeks after, life in Maple Ridge slowly returned to normal, though the memory of that night lingered. The snow melted from the roads, children returned to school, and the community center reopened its doors. Yet, the story of Thomas Carter became part of the town's fabric, a solemn reminder of the unpredictability of winter and the importance of looking out for one another. For me, the experience deepened my respect for the fragile balance we live in when surrounded by wilderness and weather so fierce it commands our attention. The snowstorm evacuation had tested our community's strength, and though loss had touched us, it had also brought us closer. As the first thaw of spring hinted at new beginnings, I stood once again near the edge of town, looking toward the forest. The trees stood tall and silent, the snow melting away to reveal the earth beneath. In that quiet moment, I felt a connection to the past and a hope for the future. Carried by the wind, whispered by the trees, and held in the heart of Maple Ridge. The days following the discovery of Thomas Carter's body felt unusually heavy. The storm's aftermath revealed a landscape both breathtaking and merciless. Snowdrifts lay thick along the roads, and the pale light of winter was filtered through low, brooding clouds. The cold remained relentless, biting into exposed skin and reminding us all of nature's indifferent power. Maple Ridge had always been a community bound by shared resilience, a collection of people who understood the wilderness around them and respected its moods. Yet, in the shadow of the storm and Thomas's death, there was a new tension. People moved carefully, voices subdued, eyes often turned toward the forest with a mixture of wariness and sorrow. I found myself retracing the routes that Thomas might have taken in his final hours. The forest, normally a place of refuge and quiet wonder, now felt alien, its snow-laden branches whispering secrets I could not quite grasp. Footprints faded quickly beneath fresh snow, and each step I took seemed to echo in the stillness. I visited the places Thomas frequented, the small cabin by the frozen lake, a clearing where he often stopped to rest, the old trail leading deep into the woods. These places held fragments of his life, silent witnesses to his solitary wanderings. His belongings, found scattered near the cabin, suggested he had planned a brief journey, perhaps unaware that the storm's ferocity would overtake him. The town's investigation was thorough. Authorities examined every detail: the condition of the trails, weather reports, witness accounts. The coroner's report confirmed exposure as the cause of death, a slow, merciless surrender to the cold that had crept in unnoticed until it was too late. No signs of struggle or violence marred his remains, just the quiet tragedy of a man caught unprepared by winter's grasp. Yet, even with the facts laid bare, questions lingered in my mind. Why had Thomas ventured out alone, during a time when the sky was already darkening with snow? Was there something urgent he had to attend to, or had it been a moment of impulse, a desire to escape the confinement of his cabin? These mysteries remained locked beneath the frozen ground, inaccessible and silent. In the community center, gatherings were held to remember Thomas. People shared memories, his quiet kindness, the way he had helped neighbors during past storms, his deep knowledge of the woods. There was a collective sense of loss, mingled with gratitude for the man who had been part of their lives, even if on the fringes. As the weeks passed, the storm's damage slowly healed. Trees bent under heavy ice thawed and straightened, roads were cleared, and the daily rhythms of Maple Ridge resumed. But the experience left an imprint on everyone. The fragility of life in such harsh environments became clear, as did the strength that arises when a community unites in the face of adversity. I took on a personal project after the storm, documenting the history of Maple Ridge's winters, the stories of survival and loss that had shaped the town. Through old journals, photographs, and interviews, I sought to connect Thomas's story to the larger tapestry of our collective experience. This work deepened my appreciation for the resilience required to live in such a place. Each storm, each challenge, was a chapter in a long story of human perseverance against nature's trials. Thomas's death was part of that narrative, a somber reminder, but also a call to care for one another with vigilance and compassion. Winter remained, but the fear it once carried softened into respect. The snow continued to fall each year, blankets of white covering the forest floor, yet beneath it lay the promise of renewal. The town's bonds had strengthened, forged by shared hardship and the determination to move forward. On quiet evenings, I often walked the edge of the forest, the crunch of snow underfoot the only sound. The stars shone clear and cold above, and the silence was profound. In those moments, I felt connected to something larger, a timeless rhythm of nature and humanity, life and loss intertwined. Though Thomas's story ended tragically, it inspired a renewed sense of community and care. The lessons of that December remained: to prepare, to watch out for one another, and to honor the fragile beauty of life amid the cold and snow. As the first signs of spring began to appear, the snow receded, revealing the earth's awakening beneath. Maple Ridge, scarred but steadfast, stood ready to face whatever lay ahead, carrying with it the memory of a man who had walked its frozen paths and become part of its enduring story.